in that context. So I hope at the end of this talk that you've got some ideas from what I say today. So a bit of an outline of where I'm going to go. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that we've got in the world today. I'm going to speculate about what the future might hold moving past these challenges or moving on with these challenges. I'm going to think about where's the field of positive psychology going, particularly the application of it, and what's its future look like. Then I'm going to speculate about, well, who's going to get it to the future? How's it going to get there, and when's this going to happen? And I'm going to make some comments around that, and then we're going to end with hopefully some applause or ridicule, depends if you like the talk or not, but it keeps me on my edge of my seat. So that's a bit of a plan outline for the talk today. I'm going to start with the challenges of the present. So there's almost 8 billion of us on this earth, but in comparison to the solar system, we're actually really quite small. But there are a lot of us. There's almost 8 billion. But when we break that down and we look at it in a percentage way, such as the graph on the left there, I've sort of highlighted we still have some really big problems. Almost 8 billion of us. Almost 77% don't have adequate shelter. A lot of people are overweight or undernourished. Some people are starving. So there's a lot of us, but we still have some really big problems. There's essentially a lot of inequality. And there are lots of different types of inequality. So we've got gender inequality with pay gaps, we've got racial inequality, political inequality, global, social, economic, educational, technological, inequality of resource and opportunity. There's lots of inequality and there's lots of different types of inequality. But the key thing to take away is inequality is growing. So it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And that's a big problem. The second problem that I think we've got is there's a lot of complexity now as various fields of science are progressing. So I've got up there just an example of a conceptual overview. So this isn't even the detailed map of what work well-being looks like according to science. So that just gives you an idea of, we have some really complex ideas and knowledge now, but not just in the field of work, but in health and social settings and systems, such as the refugee crisis might be a good example of that, dark web, rocket science. All of these things are really complex fields and notions to deal with. But really, a lot of this comes down to the rate and pace of change. And I really like this quote by Harry Horsdick there. The world is moving so fast these days that the man who says it can't be done is generally interrupted by somebody doing it. So we're living in a world of increasing rate and pace of change, and that's leading to a really complex perception from us as humans. That's the second challenge I think we've got. So we've got inequality and increasing complexity. The third one is really to do with the Earth. I think we really can't deny global warming anymore. It's a huge problem, and it's resulting in increased poor air quality, more pollution, population control issues, such as crossing borders now, famine, food wastage. Access to clean water will become an increasingly important issue as the years go by. Many species are dying out because of the increased temperatures, not just fish, but animals, but also vegetation. We have some issues to do with some of the science that we're doing, and the ethics of that might lead to the Earth having some problems as well. And then global war, and we're not living in a prosperous time of peace like in the Greek times. No, we've got war in Europe. We've got increased terrorism. We've got the questions about the impact of how democratic the UN actually is, and we've got these, and that's largely related around issues to do with the Earth. The fourth issue that I think is a smaller one than the first three, but still a big issue, and that is that a lot of people, of the 8 billion of us, when we put aside their needs, such as shelter and food and so forth, their mental health or their well-being is not so good. So a lot of people are unhappy, they're stressed, they're depressed, they're anxious. But as we look through the years, as we're getting better technology and so forth, people are actually getting sadder. They're reporting less meaning in life and purpose in life. Most people that go to work are unhappy. The amount of suicides per year is phenomenal, 800,000, and 1 billion have a mental health issue. So I don't think it can be denied from the research that a lot of people aren't actually doing well in life. So that's a huge challenge. And that's a challenge to remediate their ill-being, but also to promote their well-being. And then a fifth challenge that I thought I'd just add to this list is bad fashion sense. I think that's another one that I think we can tackle as well. So to recap, I think we live in a world that has some major issues with increasing inequality, increasing complexity, keeping the Earth alive and healthy, and people not doing so well, and increasing rates of unhappiness. And of course, bad fashion sense as well. So those are some challenges we've got globally at the present. But it's not all doom and gloom, as I put on this slide. There's actually some good stuff happening and great progress that's happened. So we've made remarkable declines in poverty over the last 40 years. A lot of people have access to communication technology such as phones. Rates of literacy are increasing. Medical science is very impressive in the disease that it can target now. Population of humans are growing rather than declining. So if it's declining, it'd be more of a problem. And less people are starving than there were 25 years ago. So while the rates are still high, they're a lot less than they were. So, and the pandemic seems to be coming to an end, according to most Western countries. So there are, although there's some challenges in the present, there's also some things to be quite grateful for and some progress to celebrate. So I guess if I was going to recap it, I'd say, despite living in a world that has some major challenges, such as increasing inequality and complexity and so forth, it's not all doom and gloom. There's good stuff happening as well, such as declining rates of poverty and increasing levels of literacy and so forth. So there's some good stuff and some bad stuff, so maybe a bit of both. So that's a bit of a context setting, really. So that leaves the question of what does the future hold? If that's the present, we've got some challenges, but we've got some good stuff. What does the future hold for us as humans? I think some speculation here can't be denied, and that I think we'll see more increasing use of robotics, see enhanced communication technologies and access to knowledge, see increased standards of luxury, we'll see better transport options. These are things that are all on the horizon. Better fashion, I'm not too sure about just yet. So in those things coming about, I think that'll involve new technologies, new ways of working, new ways of getting around, and new ways of getting along. So I think there's a lot to be actually excited about in the future. Some new things that are going to be quite beneficial, particularly for our well-being, coming down the pipeline, so to speak, or coming our way. So this just prompts me to ask you, do you feel excited about the future? Looking 10 years into the future with these new technologies coming on board, such as driverless cars and electronic voting and things. Do you feel excited about how the future is going to pan out? Regardless of how excited you are, I think we can reasonably expect some of that to happen. So the question that I then think is, what role can positive psychology play in shaping that future for the better? How can it make life better, so to speak, according to Dr. Tim Lomas? So Tim sums up the adventure of positive psychology really with the one mission of making life better. And that really is a nice way to sum up what applied positive psychology is. It's about making life better. So thinking about how this future technologies will come into play, will they or will they not make life better? Another way to think about it. The other way to think about it is, where is positive psychology going in this future? So I'm assuming many people at the conference know what positive psychology is, but I've just got a slide up there with some notes for those that are new to the discipline or field of positive psychology. And this is more for your benefit than people that have a deep understanding of positive psychology already. But if you don't, it's a branch of psychology that conducts scientific inquiry into factors that help individuals, communities, and organizations thrive by building on strengths and virtues. And it studies all sorts of topics such as strengths and happiness and flow and meaning and so forth. But really its main aim was to expand psychology from just remediating the negatives or repairing the negatives in life, such as depression, stress, and anxiety, to also promoting the positives in life. So capitalizing on these strengths and developing a sense of meaning and purpose and so forth. So it's going from what's going wrong with individuals to what's going right with individuals. And in fact, it captures both. So I've got a nice sort of graph there with -10 to +10, and traditional psychology was really -10 to just above 0. Positive psychology now, I think, really, according to the research base and the practice application, really probably spans about -9 to +10 now. So a lot of research recently around how positive psychology is good for people with mental health challenges as well. Not so much the biological ones, such as schizophrenia and bipolar, but for most other mental health challenges. Now thinking about the application of the field of positive psychology and what are called positive psychological interventions, or PPIs they're also to refer to, or another way to rephrase them is empirically validated techniques and strategies to increase well-being. They've been effectively used in schools to improve well-being and increase academic outcomes, and businesses to improve engagement and performance, and in communities to improve health. So we have quite a history now of these interventions, or our applied positive psychology knowledge, being applied in different sectors with robust studies now for a good 20 years. to know that they work. The meta-analysis that review these studies show that they do in fact remediate ill-being, so they make people less depressed and less stressed and so forth. They also promote well-being. They make people happier and more satisfied with life and so forth. And these effects last. So if we can get people to learn these skills and implement them in their life, we know that a lot of these techniques are good for most people. What we don't know so much about, though, is what well-being is and what optimal human functioning is for people. So philosophers have been talking about this for years, but I think when we're applying this in certain contexts, we don't really unpack what well-being means to people, and that's a really great place to start. What is optimal human functioning to them? I've got a picture there of my daughter, who I think is an epitome of somebody who's optimal human that's functioning. But I think we need greater understanding of what well-being means to people before we apply our knowledge and techniques to them. So I think everybody's recipe for well-being is slightly different. And if we look back over history, actually, if we track back the histories and origins of positive psychology, a lot of it was philosophically based. We've got, in this particular image, we've got Buddha, we've got Aristotle, we've got John Stuart Mill, some really key central philosophers that have influenced the thinking of many predominant psychologists as to what optimal human functioning or the good life actually is. And who knows, maybe I might make it there one day. So this all brings me back now to thinking about the purpose of positive psychology. If my stated claim that the purpose is to make life better, to actually apply this knowledge in life, then let's just stop and think, what have people said about the purpose of positive psychology? So I'm just going to quickly go over what Martin Seligman, one of the founders of the field, said the purpose of positive psychology was, what Chris Peterson, another key founder of the field, said it was, then what we can glean from all the other influential positive psychologists, and then what we can glean from the literature. And then after I've done that, I'm going to speculate about what I think the purpose is. So Seligman was really clear at the start. He said positive psychology is founded on the belief that people want to lead meaningful and fulfilling lives, cultivate what is best in themselves, and to enhance their experiences of love, work, and play. And he set the moonshot goal of a very ambitious goal that 51% of the world could be flourishing by 2051, which is only 28 years away from now. It's not that far. And he's obviously really well known for his PERMA model well-being. So that was Seligman's view. Chris Peterson, the late Chris Peterson, back in 2006, wrote a really nice chapter speculating about where positive psychology was going. And looking along the list of what he wrote in the chapter, he's probably got half of this right and half of this wrong. So positive psychology hasn't yet fused within mainstream psychology. The negatives will also be appealing, so he was right on that. The negativity bias, or bad being stronger than good, as Roy Baumeister's research shows, certainly the case. Clarity over hedonic set points, so whether when we improve our well-being, whether we drop back to the same point, set point before, there's not clarity over that just yet. Components of the good life exist degrees, better longitudinal studies, so we're just at that at the moment where we're starting to create better longitudinal studies. How interventions will generalize and scale, there's still a lot of question marks we don't know there. Social settings that will enable the good life, we're just starting to look into those. And happy pills or chemical inductions of well-being would be more popular. So he got some of this right and some of this wrong, but it was a long time ago, 2006. But it's a different view to what Seligman put. In one of the projects that I did, I wrote 3 books where I interviewed 44 key prominent positive psychologists in total, and there's an example of some of them there, the likes of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Ed Diener and Todd Kashdan and Barbara Fredrickson and so forth. And I asked them in these interviews where positive psychology was going, and these are some of the themes that they said. So they said it needed more interdisciplinary collaboration. We needed to train the young scientists better. There'll be some cool new topics coming on board around psychological flexibility and positive parenting and time perspective and so forth, and all that's largely come true. There'll be some topics that are getting too much attention at the time, so such as drinks. It needed to focus more on funding the young scientists, and it needed to really hone in on making sure the quality of the science was very high. So a lot of what the rest of the key leaders in positive psychology said about the future of positive psychology turned out to be quite accurate. When we look at what the data shows, or the publication trends, we see that there've been a lot of publications on positive emotions, and particularly the build and build theory of Barbara Fredrickson's. A lot on positive psychological interventions, which is great. So that means we're not just talking theory, we're actually applying it in the real world, although a lot of those were efficacy studies, pretty much 90-95% of them. So an efficacy study is one that just says, does this work? You know, does A influence B? An effectiveness trial is the next level of that, where it takes the, does it work, something that we know that works, and then says, well, where does it work, and how does it work, and how long does it work, and how much does it cost? It's more of a real world study, and that's kind of where we are at the moment. We're moving from taking interventions that we know work in very controlled laboratory settings, and we're taking them into the real world to find out how to make them work there. And there was quite a lot of research around strengths as well. So that's what we saw when we looked at the literature about where the trends were going in positive psychology research. And of course, others wrote books with speculations on this too. So a good book by Matthew White and Dr. Gavin Slimp, who's at our Centre for Wellbeing Science, speculating about the future. But the one I really like is by Ken Sheldon, Todd Cashton, and Mike Steger there on the right about designing positive psychology, which really looked at the future as well. So now to what I think, or my view, is that positive psychology, and particularly the application of it, has had some great inroads in various specific areas. So we've done a lot of research around positive neuroscience, positive education, culture and well-being, how well-being pans out in organizations and the military. So in specific areas, we actually know quite a lot now. There's been quite a lot of research and quite well-funded research. But where I want to say is, where can we take it now to make it even better, and what types of interventions would do that? So these are some of the adventures that I see in store for the application of positive psychology. One's around, and I'll go through these in a bit more detail shortly. So it's around discomfort, strategic laziness, play, sex, slowing down, link between nature and well-being, use of technology, targeting the most disadvantaged, the link between physical health and well-being, and positive parenting as a key vector for change. If I could have more than 10, I'd probably say these other things are also really important about we know now there's a strong link between where we put our attention and how that impacts our well-being, how the media influences our well-being, how urban design influences our well-being, well-being literacy, so even just having the language to talk about and think about well-being is really important. Positive therapy is really coming on strong. Links between sport and well-being, locations for well-being, such as gyms and cafes, how well-being can be used to make criminals find meaning and have a better life and stop committing crimes, actually retiring into a good life of well-being at the end of life. So there's all sorts of other areas too. I've got to talk about all of them today. But one pathway to well-being that I think is really under-realized is the link between discomfort and well-being. So I'm not too sure what it's like in Indonesia, but in Australia at least, we live in a world where almost like we're addicted to comfort. All the technology we buy into, such as lazy boy chairs or apps on smartphones and things, are really to help us avoid discomfort of one sort or another. They're to make our life easier rather than experience that discomfort. But as Robert Biswastina has really pointed out, discomfort is quite a nice pathway to well-being. We shouldn't really try and avoid it. We should sort of embrace it. And when we think about some of the best days of our life, chances are they have an element of discomfort in them. And I think that's so true. And it's along the lines of this idea of we shouldn't be avoiding our negative emotions. They're actually quite functional and good for us. We should learn how to manage them, but not avoid them. And it's the same with an element of discomfort. Another idea is around strategic laziness. And this is the idea that you can't use your strengths all the time, because that's just too exhausting. So there's quite a bit of literature now around underuse and overuse of strengths and so forth. But actually thinking that being lazy is actually good for us sometimes. It helps us recapitalize our energy and refocus our attention. So and there's a couple of quotes there that I've got that kind of follow through on this, such as the one from Bill Gates there and Robert Heinlein on the right there. So this idea of strategic laziness, I think, is good as well. The other is play. So a very nice book written by Stuart Brown back in 2006 really highlighted all the benefits of play for us. And kids, we know, are great at play, but as we become adults, we become less good at it and we do it less often. And some professions really embrace play, such as teachers, for example. They really embrace play, maybe because they're around kids, I'm not sure. But at the moment, I'm working with a lot of lawyers and law firms, and they don't embrace play at all. It's not a context which is familiar to them, and they feel really unnatural doing it. But I think the science is quite clear. If we're not getting more play in our lives, it's really hard to have high well-being. So whether that be play at work or play outside of work and life, the idea is we're kind of evolutionary built to play, so we should be playing more. The other is the idea that as humans, we'll have sex lives, there's very limited research and evidence that our field is developing about the link between a healthy sex life and well-being. Just kind of ignored it. But we really know that's in relationships, it's a real glue for social connect. So I think we need to research that a little bit more as well. Probably one of my favorite pathways to well-being would be slowing down and simplifying your life. And again, there's very little research on this, but I know personally this works for me. There's a really good book there by Carl Horney, In Praise of Slowness, and I really like one of his quotes. These days, even instant gratification takes too long. So this relates back to the challenge of complexity that I put at the start, that in a very complex world, slowing down and doing less will improve your well-being. There's only 4 studies on this to date. 2 of them are actually poor quality, so there's really only 2. And even then, they're not really great studies. But I think we can see, despite the evidence, a lot of anecdotal evidence, at least, to suggest that people that slow down their life when they become overwhelmed and they simplify their life as well, that seems to be a pathway to well-being. It's certainly a pathway that's ripe for more research. Another that there is an absolute ton of research around now is the link between nature and well-being. So getting out into green spaces, into sunlight, caring for growth, such as tending to a garden. All of these have great impacts, not just for our well-being, but for our physical health, for our memory, for our attention, for our cognitive abilities. I really think the strength of that evidence now is such that it can't be ignored. And in fact, here in Australia, some doctors are prescribing nature as a remedy to things like anxiety and depression and so forth. They're saying, actually, go out and become more physically healthy, but also be careful where you do that. In other words, don't just go out to an area of the neighbourhood which is all concrete buildings. Go to a park where you can actually get the what's called attention restoration theory. You restore your attention and get some of the other benefits of nature rather than the concrete buildings and jungles, so to speak. Another is this idea of well-being technology. So with the increasing complexity that humans are faced, to bring in and consider everything, humans really are the bottleneck. So the idea here is, how can we use technology such as smartphones and wearable devices and things like biofeedback to help us monitor our well-being, understand our well-being, know when we could tap into some of the applied positive psychology interventions that might be useful to us. So this is technology that might remind you to think of some good things at the moment when your well-being's dipping, or it might remind you when you're eating to savor your food more and things like that. So there's a question here about how can this technology be better utilized for us to use our skill set once we've developed it, or even to develop the skill set of learning about the applications of positive psychology even to start with. So this is a really big field. There's a lot of investment going into it now at various international countries because there's a lot of reward to be reaped now. So early stage in technology, there were some nice apps, Happify and others that have gone on to be quite lucrative financially, but also prove that they're actually having an impact in regards to improving people's well-being and their health and so forth. And we see a lot of companies now, and particularly health insurance companies, are rolling out these apps, but also with some of these devices like that measure galvanic skin response, or the Muse there, for example, brainwave activity and heart rate variability. All this kind of technology, I think, is just on the verge of coming now, and I think that's kind of exciting. Another one is really targeting the most disadvantaged. So what we know is that applying positive psychology to humans that have a lower level of base well-being to start with, they've essentially got more room to improve their well-being than people that are average or already have good well-being. So the question there is, if we want to have a globe full of people that are flourishing, 51% flourishing by 2051, maybe a better place to start is people with very low well-being. So we need to think about how we can target those, this also aligns with the inequality, those that are poor, disadvantaged, and might find hard accessing this information about positive psychological interventions. So I think that's a great opportunity for us to think about, rather than increasing the well-being of people whose well-being is already reasonably high or already have a lot of resources. What can we do on scale for the people who don't? And these might be people that, for one reason or another, don't have resources, or they don't have the literacy level, or they don't have the technology. How can we put programs and systems in place to get our science, so to speak, to more people, the people that actually need it? So not, for example, that guy who wants money to drive his Porsche. The next area I think we've made great inroads in is the link between physical health and well-being. So eating healthy foods such as fruits and vegetables, moving physically, so getting some aerobic, but also some weight training, and getting a good night's sleep. So it's the quality of sleep. There's one study that I did when I lived in New Zealand, so I'm a Kiwi, was called the Sovereign Wellbeing Index. We followed 10,000 New Zealanders for 2 years, and that was a very representative sample to the New Zealand census. So it was a big study, but it was a very in-depth study of people's physical health and their psychological well-being. And what we found conclusively there was that people that were eating well, moving regularly, they weren't sedentary, and they were getting a good night's sleep, they all had well above average levels of well-being. But we also found the converse. So people that were eating a poor diet, they were very sedentary, and they weren't getting a good night's sleep, or getting very low levels of hours of sleep, their well-being was very low. And that kind of led us to conclude that actually physical health is really a foundation for psychological well-being. It's very hard to improve your well-being if your physical health is not being addressed at the same time, or is poor to start with. So that link, I think, is more robust now as well. And the last one I just want to mention is around positive parenting, because when you think of vectors for change, or how can we take our science out into the world to impact the most people, a lot of people are parents, just like the area of positive education. A lot of people, almost everyone goes to school and work as well. A lot of people work. But when we think of parenting, it's a great vector for change in the sense of it's that relationship between the parent and the child, and it's the opportunity to teach both people the skills of well-being, and usually they teach their friends and pass it on and things like that. So I think positive parenting, led by Professor Lee Waters here in Australia, the founder of our centre, is a great avenue and area to keep an eye on as the field further develops. Because I think the more we see of this, the more those conversations happen outside of the parenting dyad. So they happen at schools, they happen in games, and so forth. And another interesting area related to this, I think, is around free-range play for kids and risk and encouraging failure. So we know from some of the studies that the centre that I used to work with that did that the more risk that you can give kids earlier on, they learn the skills to manage risk before that risk becomes too critical later in life at their teenage years, which might be to do with drinking or driving or things like that. So that early adaptation of risk and giving them the ability to settle conflicts themselves and things like that, that skill set then goes on to address well-being as well. So those are some exciting areas, I think, for the future, for the application of positive psychology to focus on. How can we embrace discomfort? How can we embrace strategic laziness? How can we play more? How can we really consider a healthy sex life in the picture of our well-being? How do we know, and what strategies have we got to slow down and simplify our life when we need to, when we become overwhelmed by complexity? How can we capitalize on the links between nature and well-being, which are really inbuilt evolutionary links? How can we use technology better in the applications that we've already got, but also in new applications? And how can we target some of the most disadvantaged who have the most to gain from some of the knowledge that we've got around meaning in life and well-being and so forth? How can we capitalize on what we know about physical health, its relation to well-being, and building people's well-being per se? So in other words, what role does physical health play in the application of a PPI or a positive psychological intervention? And positive parenting as another key vector. So there are some exciting areas, I think, that some of them are currently developing, some of them are quite established, some of them can infuse our interventions at the moment for the future. But now that I've painted a picture of where I think some of the application science is going, I really want to speculate about, well, how's it going to get there? So I've got now 10, which I think are mostly newish ways that positive psychology can thrive and impact to create more impact globally, to address more of the challenges that we've got. And this is my list. I think we need to simplify our messages, have better studies, start a movement beyond academia. We need to teach more people, better dissemination, tailor our interventions better, be more collaborative, address the critics, become entrepreneurial, and make some friends. Now, I'm just going to unpack each of those as well quickly because I think they're important. So in short, I think we need better application. We've got a lot of applied positive psychology knowledge from the research base and talking to practitioners that apply it in the real world. But these are ways that the applications can be made better. And if they can be made better, I think they can have more of an impact on more of the challenges that we've got. So the first one is in simplifying our messages. And I learned this lesson the hard way when I used to do a lot of consulting with large organizations and government departments and whatnot. I generally use the model on the left there, which is very complex. And quite often people didn't have the time or the will or the want to understand that. What they really wanted was just a simpler understanding of how well-being could work in their organization. So I made this model, which I call the me, we, us model. And I'd just say, well, looking at your organization, so it might be an insurance company, for example, or a bank or a law firm, I'd say at an individual level, your employees can do a strengths program, they can do a mindfulness program. Essentially you just need to provide some resources for them to do the program by themselves. So pay for the strengths program, for example. So at an individual level, there's a bunch of things that employees could do to improve their well-being, and they can select from a range of those. Then there's the we level. I'd say, well, there's a bunch of things that employees can do with the team that they work with. So these are specific positive psychological interventions around communication that will make their well-being better and make work well-being better in the work environment. Or it might be between the employee and the manager, techniques such as job crafting, which is about adopting a better day at work for yourself, which generally flows on to increase well-being. So there's a bunch of relational things that can happen which require two people, but still the organization can fund it. And then I'd say there's an us level. So there's the whole of the organization. And by that I mean the organization could have a well-being framework, they could have a budget for well-being, they could look at their practices and policies as they are, how they impact well-being. There are some techniques like appreciative inquiry which touch the whole of the organization, so they're a bit like a whole organization PPI or positive psychological intervention themselves. But it was just this framework of me, we, us, because it's simple framework to get your head around and understand. The CEO or the HR director understood it, as well as the frontline receptionist. So it wasn't a matter of explaining a complex model about how work well-being works. It was about using language and a very simple way of explaining things as a pathway into engaging people about well-being. So that's the first way that I think we can do this. We need to simplify our messaging and bring the complexity out of it. The second thing that I think we need to do is realize we need better studies, less correlational studies. We need more complex research designs, and we need designs which bring different kinds of data together. So as positive psychology started, there were a lot of correlational studies which would create one type of data, so just observational data such as a survey, and that would be it. But we're kind of past that point now where we know a lot about the relationships between things. What we need is actually to triangulate data sources such as observational data and self-report data and biological data and behavioral data, and to have more sophisticated research designs such as social network analysis. My take on looking at the field of applied positive psychology specifically, not positive psychology, but the application of it, is when we assess whether these applications are working, by and large, we just ask people what they think. So we assess their cognitions, and we ask people how they feel, so we their emotions. We know very little about what happy people do or the impacts of our positive psychological interventions on people's behaviors. Almost none of the assessment measure people's behaviors, and I'm pretty sure none of them assess people's physiology, and that's usually because those studies are a lot more expensive to set up. But that's in the research sense. In the application sense, it's very rare for us to assess somebody's physiology, to collect blood markers on stress levels, for example. So by this, I'm sort of saying one pathway that we need to do is think more sophisticated assessment in regards to our applications. We need to ask better questions in regards to how are these things working in the real world. So that's a bit like what I was saying before around effectiveness trials rather than efficacy studies. So how is it working? Who's it working for? When's it working? How much is it costing? How long is it lasting? These kinds of questions, they really require better types of studies than we've got at the moment. And I can see a trend of this starting to change now. but I think we need to do more of it. Another is to start a movement beyond academia. So if we're going to tackle some of these world challenges, such as climate change or inequality or global wars and so forth, having debates about this within the field of positive psychology is a good place to start. But we actually need to take that outside the academic environment and start talking to the politicians, the people in media, the billionaires with the resources, all sorts of other people beyond academia. There's a very nice video I've just put up there of a TED Talk, which you can Google and check out, which is about how to start a movement and get people engaged. So I think with this strategy, I think we need to think about applied positive psychology beyond academia and beyond research, but actually getting this knowledge to people that can actually have some influence and do something with it. Could be a social influencer even. I think we need more people involved that are more passionate about it. So I think a good place to start there is we need to teach it more broadly. At the moment, we've got, I think last count, I think we're 14 Masters of Applied Positive Psychology internationally. But I'd love to see 300 or more. I'd love to see it being taught at every school. I'd like to see every kid have a wellbeing plan rather than just an academic plan. You know, there's so much more that we can do, but I think the more people that we can teach, the more people that are informed about what positive psychology is, and particularly what we know about the application of it to people in the real world, the more that they can then look at their sphere of influence and go, actually, how can we use this knowledge to impact, I don't know, surgery or veterinary science or wherever they are working in, whatever their world involves. So I think a good place to start is to teach it more, and we've got some great examples of some institutions, not just academic, but private as well. So I put some up there like Nova Project or Positive Acorn that are taking this to schools or organizations, to the private sector. But my key message here is we need to teach it more. We need to get people more involved. The next is better dissemination. So when I think about impacting a lot of people rather than one person in applied positive psychology, probably one of the best ways to do this is through public policy. It's talking to policymakers and politicians about the science that we've got, the science around application, and how that should be infusing into strategies, particularly strategies in regards to reducing ill-being in a community or in a country, and how positive psychology and wellbeing science can have a role to do there, a role to play. So I've found great impact through public policy. So I've ran 3 wellbeing and public policy conferences to date. And that's been a key avenue or vector for change in the sense of it brings the politicians together with the treasury or the economic people and the policy people and the positive psychology or the psychology people, but all talking about the same thing and getting on the same page about what wellbeing is and what the science says and what can actually be done. So I see public policy as one key vector for change, but also social media, organizations, schools. We've got to think about how we get this knowledge out there rather than just applying it to one person or one group or one school. For example, it's about school systems and it's about educational departments rather than one private school or so forth. So I really think we need to think bigger in regards to our dissemination of this knowledge base. The other thing I think we're ripe for right now is to tailor our interventions much better than we currently do. So I think the idea of a one-size-fits-all intervention is a bit behind us now. We need to actually tailor our intervention to the needs of the people that we're working with, we're addressing, and realize that actually one intervention is going to have different impacts on people in the group, and that's related to what they think well-being is different. So it's a bit like the mindfulness literature. Mindfulness is it's not good for everyone. You know, for some people with high trait level anxiety, it actually harms them. So it's good for a lot of people. It's just not good for everyone. And many of our interventions are a bit like that. They'll work better for some people than others, depending on what's important for their well-being at the time. So I think we can tailor our interventions much better. We need to deliver them a little bit more quickly, especially using more experiential learning activities, more group-based learning. I think would be beneficial. Thinking about the supportive environments for change of these interventions, so doing them in, so if it was a work wellbeing intervention, doing it at work rather than at home, in the context with which they're learning and can apply and embed the skills. Better evaluation is certainly needed. It's probably the biggest problem I think I see in the field is that a lot of practitioners apply these positive psychological interventions but don't do any evaluation, so they don't know whether they're working or how long they're working or who they're working for. So actually collecting some baseline wellbeing assessment data to start at the end of the intervention or during the intervention, at the end of the intervention, and then post the intervention, see whether their strategies to embed those skills are lasting. So many of the practitioners I talk to probably don't do this very well, but I think we certainly need to do better evaluation of the interventions so that we can also learn about why they're working, what's driving the change, and so forth. Many practitioners just assess the outcome of the intervention. So did the group get happier, for example? So that's just an outcome. Time one, they were 6 out of 10 happy, and time two, they were 8 out of 10 happy. But unless you develop a sophisticated assessment and evaluation strategy, you don't know whether they've got happier because the mood of the country changed, somebody got elected, or some public event happened. You've actually got to create assessments and evaluations which unpack the drivers of change. So, for example, if you put together a wellbeing package which has strengths and mindfulness, and does your evaluation not just capture well-being, happiness, and life satisfaction, and so forth, but are you measuring changes in things like strength use and mindfulness abilities? And so, more sophisticated evaluation, I certainly think, is needed. But I also think we need to look at longer-term impact. Most of the studies of our applied positive psychology interventions are really short. They're less than a year. We really know little about how long these interventions last post a year. There are, in fact, very few studies. And many of the studies are actually very short in the sense of if there's a 3 time point intervention, so before the intervention, at the end of the intervention, that third time point is quite often 2 weeks later or up to 3 months later. It's not 6 or 9 or 12 months later. So there's a bit of a risk in our research base in knowing how well these interventions last. And that's important from a cost-benefit analysis, because why would a funder fund you to disseminate and teach these skills at scale if they didn't have confidence that the impact's going to last? So it's one thing making people happy over a short period of time for a couple of weeks, but if they're going to go to all the effort of learning the skills and the cost of developing these programs and implementing them, you really want things that'll last a long time. The way I think about it is a bit like how China does a lot of its policy. It thinks 7 generations ahead. It's not about making a choice that's going to impact one generation. We need to think about positive interventions which are going to be embedded such that people will gain the benefits for them over their whole life course, not just for the next 2 weeks or 3 months, or even 1 year, but actually how can they integrate these skills into their being so that they don't forget them. I've talked about efficacy versus effectiveness, and I think there's a lot of problems around selling false hope. So this idea that when we're tailoring our interventions for a school, for example, just saying we're going to come in and do all these positive psychological interventions, everything will be fine. It's much more sophisticated than that, and there's a bit of a danger here. One of our dangers is selling that false hope when it doesn't all go to plan, and you don't have the evaluation in place to actually unpick where it's gone wrong. And the last one I'll just mention is I think we can supercharge our interventions and make them more portable. So by that I mean a lot of the research around applied positive psychology is around an intervention which is done in a setting where you take yourself out of what you're doing, you go away and you write in a journal, you do something, but actually I'm talking about interventions that are portable. So when you are going through, 5 red lights in your car and you feel a bit frustrated, what do you do in that moment? You don't sort of pull out a journal and start writing. What interventions or thinking strategies would be useful right then? And by supercharge, I mean a lot of the intervention knowledge we have now can be combined for a practice that could gain the benefits of these different pathways to well-being. So I think a lot of the testing we've done in applied positive psychology, as I said at the start, was around does A impact B? But it's really, once we know something works, the next question is how can we put these things together that we know work in combination so that they can be used and have more effect. So if we know, for example, that relaxing your body, being more grateful, where we put our attention, all of these things impact our well-being. How can we develop a technique such as deep breathing where we can get people to breathe out and relax their body, breathe out and think about what they're grateful for, breathe out and think about what they want their attention to be. So short little interventions that can be both portable but also tap different pathways to well-being. So I think we're at a stage where, with the knowledge we've got, we can be quite creative in designing some micro interventions that are portable but also tap different pathways to well-being for more cumulative effect. I think that's one of the good challenges we've got right now. I also think we need a better collaborative plan. And in this sense, I think we need everyone in the room, David Cooperwright is apt for saying, we need to understand how change happens, and that's no easy feat. But we've got a lot of literature around change management frameworks and theory of change in particular. But what we do know is that change is always difficult, even change for the better. But at the moment, I think we don't have a collaborative plan about, reaching 51% flourishing by 2051. It's almost like everyone's gone off and done their own thing. I kind of think we're at the stage where we need a collaborative plan about, which dissemination strategies might be most appropriate, which science should we be highlighting, and things like that. So I think the time is right for that more collaborative plan about how we can use what we know from the science of positive psychology to address the world's challenges that we've currently got. And I think we need to address the critics better as well. That's one thing I don't think we've done as a field, particularly around the applied nature of positive psychology, and of course their bad fashion sense. So there's been some real critics of the science and of the application per se, and how that fits within other approaches to remediating ill-being in particular. But one thing I'd really like to see is the field more distinctly address the critics, particularly in the conferences that the field runs. I think we certainly need to become more entrepreneurial, embrace technology in order to get that large-scale impact and disseminate that knowledge. So we've got some really good examples of how technology has had a great impact on a larger scale. I love the NOVA project by the late Ed Diener and his foundation, and supported and run by Robert Biswastina. I think it's a really high-quality free resource that just embraces the use of technology. That's one way to get our science out there, and that's just one of many examples. And we have other entrepreneurial technology such as Happify, apps for happiness, and so forth. But I think in order to have bigger impact, we need to become more entrepreneurial and embrace technology to get that scale. And the last thing I think that we need to do is make some more friends, particularly with the helping professionals, the people that are working with people to remediate their ill-being at the moment, such as the clinical psychologists, the counselling psychologists, the social workers, so forth. So we wrote a really nice book called Wellbeing Recovery and Mental Health, just on this topic a few years ago. But my point here is, I think as an applied positive psychologist, you want to be really conscious of what the helping professionals are doing, and they're working with the majority of people that have issues to do with ill-being. I think coaching psychologists are also another natural alliance, because a lot of their motivational theories can help us understand ourselves better. And in many ways, we see many MAP programs integrating coaching psychology, as our one has at the University of Melbourne, and next year we'll have a professional certificate in coaching for wellbeing, specifically based on positive psychology coaching. So I think that's another nice alliance. And also the social psychologists. I think one thing positive psychology hasn't really done well, focused a little bit too much on the individual, is think about how the whole field of social psychology and what it knows about relationships, and how that can be beneficial for well-being. And I just think the social psychologists are pretty fun people to hang out with. So there's 10 ideas of how we can make our applications better. We can simplify our messaging about them. We can create better studies, so we can say they're more useful. We can start a movement beyond academia, so we're taking this out so people know more about it. If we can teach it to more people and create their passion, they can taste wellbeing science and spread it. I think that's going to be a key vector. If we can think more about how we're disseminating it. Many people aren't disseminating, but actually we need to think about strategies for disseminating that are going to touch more people, such as public policy and large media. And in fact, it just reminds me of, I went out to dinner once with a guy named Alex Kalesh, who's the world expert in aging. And I asked him, I said, you've written hundreds of books and 500 articles, what's your career highlight? And he said, it was actually writing Into the Days of Our Lives, which is a TV series script in Brazil. And he said, putting my knowledge of positive aging into that TV series, had 80 million people watch it. He said, that's much more than anyone that'll read my books or read my academic articles. So it's that kind of thinking about how can we get into people's attentional space, whether that be a daytime television sitcom or it be social media, something else. Tailoring our wellbeing interventions better by supercharging them and focusing beyond the individual, with the individual. A more collaborative plan. So I think it's time for people to come back together rather than go off and do their own. address the critics, become more entrepreneurial, make some friends. So I've suggested some key pathways that I think make our applications bigger, better, have more impact. And now I just want to loop back and say, got to do all that whilst also thinking about these big challenges we've got around inequality, around complexity, around global warming, and the fourth one around increasing levels of unhappiness. I think that if we do this in particular, we'll certainly target that fourth one. So coming to the end of my talk now, I think we need to focus more on what success looks for positive psychology, and particularly the application of that knowledge in the real world to these challenges. I don't think anyone's talked about that. I don't think anyone's thought about that, but that's essentially what I think we need to do. And how the success helps with real world problems. Because like I started this talk by saying, it's not so much about asking one individual to try one technique to become a little bit happier. It's about thinking about how can we use the science to tackle some of the big, wicked problems of today, some of the big challenges that we've got, over and above helping that individual become a little bit happier. So for me, it's about more useful applied positive psychology. It's about changing the trajectory a little bit of where applied positive psychology is thought about in regards to helping one individual, one group become a little bit happier, but actually how can we use a lot of the science to address some of the bigger problems and challenges we've got? So I just want to end in the last few minutes with a bit of a sum up. And to do this, I quite often think of the work of Barbara Fredrickson and Daniel Kahneman around peak end theory. So peak end theory, if you've never heard about it before, is a theory that states that people's overall judgment of an experience, like of this talk that I'm giving, is usually influenced by the peak of the experience and how it ends. So the research behind this has to do with how our memory through our positive emotions and our experiences. So you're likely to remember the peak of this experience, so the thing that really caught your attention, and then you're also likely to remember how it ends. So for me, that's telling me I need to end really strongly because this is what you're going to remember. So I thought the best way to end is a bit of a summary of maybe what I think and what the literature says around applied positive psychology. So for me, I like the way that Todd Kashdan and Robert Biswastina summarized The Good Life about 10 years ago as best construed as a matrix with some happiness, some occasional sadness, because that's usually quite functional for us, a sense of purpose, playfulness, some psychological flexibility, as well as autonomy, mastery, and belonging. So for me, I take from that, it's not just about learning to be more positive, but it's about using scientifically informed tools, what we know from applied positive psychology, to make my thinking more flexible, accurate, clear, and expansive. And it's that thinking that I hope flows on to me being a little bit happier and a little bit healthier, but in a position then to tackle some of these problems. So I'm essentially addressing my well-being to be in a better space to help others on a larger scale with their well-being. The other part that we know from the literature is, as Chris Peterson summed it up in his book back in 2006, and it really hasn't changed, is that there's little impacts or small correlations between well-being and things such as income and IQ and age and so forth. Where the larger correlations are, or where we have better potential to have impact, is with things like that are the core root of educational positive psychology. It's around gratitude and optimism and self-esteem and social relationships, these types of things. So I think we just also need to focus back on where the strong relationships are. And lastly, my recipe for a good life, or according to the literature, in regards to improving your well-being, so you're in a better position to help others and tackle some of these challenges, is investing time and effort in your family connections, so we know that, and in your friends, so we know social relationships are the driver of well-being. Knowing your personal values and living by them, knowing your strengths, developing an optimistic thinking style, investing your money in experiences rather than things, being in work and study that you enjoy, being grateful, savoring the now more regularly, slowing down, doing less, being curious, and looking after your health. So there's a nice sort of recipe from the literature of what creates well-being in it. And of course, good fashion sense. So there's a picture of me in a suit a little while ago when I got married. So in summing up, Seligman, when he was first interviewed about positive psychology, said we've gone from good to not good enough. It was a very pessimistic view. That was quite many years ago. Now, maybe he'd say, maybe now we're maybe not bad. There's still a long way to go to being anywhere awesome or anywhere near 51% of the world flourishing, but we've come a long way in a very positive way in a short period of time. So there are many new areas to focus on. I've touched on some, such as the body and comfort addiction and so forth. I think will come into the research agenda very soon, which is I think is really exciting, help tackle some of the problems. But with regard to building a better future for the world and positive psychology and its application of the science, I think if we start to think more about how we can simplify our message to get more people to understand it and design better studies so that it's useful and teach more people about the topic and get them enthused about it, we can go beyond academia so that it's actually more widely spread. If we can focus on how we disseminate our messages to the broader public and tailor our interventions better so they fit better with people, we confront up to the critics, embrace new technology, and make some conceptual friends so we expand our interdisciplinary understandings. I think this is a good way to get there and to make an impact on some of the global challenges that we face as humans. So the message I just want to leave you with today is, let's think big, let's be bold, let's be creative, let's be authentic, and most of all, let's be collaborative. Because sure, as humans, we have problems. There are a lot of good things on the horizon to be optimistic about, particularly in regards to the application of positive psychology, both for humans and for the field itself. And just to end with my favorite quote of all time by Ralph Emerson, nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. So I'd also encourage taking a fully enthusiastic go at this. So thank you for your attention today. I hope I've imparted some thinking around the application of positive psychology beyond the individual level, which will spark some interest and some ideas.
Thank you, Professor, for providing insightful ideas. The best practices on the application of positive psychology into practices. We need to use our past experiences to enhance our new life, to be embraced to reach our well-being. We hope our overwhelmed past life experiences can be used in advantage points to better life. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there are questions have been listed down here. I hope limited time here, a few minutes for question and answer. Let's start from the questions. Good question. How can we apply positive psychology if there is some culture that doesn't accommodate or support the application of positive psychology? Do you think this?
I think that's a really good question. One of my colleagues, Mosen Joshanalu, he invented a scale called the fear of happiness scale, and he's found that in a lot of cultures, they fear being happy, or they essentially fear well-being. So the idea that well-being is the same cross-culturally is certainly not true. The thing that is true, though, is that all behavior is communication. So it's a matter of, in that culture, figuring out what is important to that culture, what does well-being mean to that culture, how's well-being built. Once you've got a picture of what that is, then you can start to work towards it, move towards it, and improve it. So the recipe for well-being will be different in different cultures. So for example, in some cultures like Brazil, it's very hedonic. In some cultures like Scandinavia, Sweden and so forth, it's very cognitive. It's about life satisfaction. So every culture has a different recipe, and some cultures are very relational. Some are very individualistic, like the United States. It's a matter of understanding in that culture what well-being means to that culture and building it from there. So it's not about applying positive psychology in a culture. It's about understanding the culture first and then looking at applied positive psychology knowledge and going, what can we draw from this that is relevant for this culture?
Okay, if it is understanding culture at first, for individual personally, the following question is, all the information about positive psychology, how to handle when we are not doing well, unhappy, stressed, depressed, anxious, and negative emotions at work or school in positive psychology. The application of positive psychology in daily is not easy. We are still learning to be more positive. What should we do then?
Okay, if I understood the question right, it's about how can positive psychology be used for the remediation of ill-being, so when things aren't going well. And if I understood that right, and to that I would say there is a place for clinical and counselling psychology to remediate ill-being, but a good place to start is also with thinking about well-being and what a good life means. So when things aren't going well, when somebody's feeling low, so they're feeling, have issues with depressed mood maybe, or they're feeling anxious, and a good way to start to overcome that is a bit like what Martin Seligman said. people aren't just pushed from the past, so their past experiences, they're actually pulled into a future. So by pulled into a future, he meant thinking about what the good life means to you, thinking about what meaning in life, what's meaningful in life for you, what your purpose really is. These things pull you into a future, and in doing that, it creates some hope and optimism, and that makes you feel less sad and so forth. So I think there's a role to play for both. I'd say the key thing is try. If you're starting to have experiences of ill-being, the best thing you can do is try different things rather than do the same thing over and over that's not working.
Hey, I think all questions, particularly in general, have been already answered by Professor Aaron. And for now, excuse me, sir, we need to show you a certificate for being our keynote speaker as part of our reward to you, sir. Please stay in a few minutes, sir, and everyone, please turn on your video and take pictures all together. Please commit it, take the pictures, please, right now. Here is your certificate. We will send you later through your email. Please
thank you
take
very
the
much.
pictures. You're welcome. Committee, please take the pictures. Okay, is it done? Committee?
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay. I think we've already been taken a picture. And we thank you for providing a magnificent idea for the exactment of positive psychology rules for a better life, which can inspire us, and hopefully we'll see you in the future, in the next year, probably hope so. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron.
Okay. Well, taking pictures. Is everything okay? The committee? Well, I think we need to. Here.
Okay, Miss. Okay, Prof,
Okay.
we are ready.
Okay, please, excuse me, sir. Can you open the video for a few seconds? Yeah, thank you. Now take the pictures, please. Okay, on 3, 3, 2, 1, go. Next. Okay, so done.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, everyone. All right. It is time for the end of today's conference. Our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker number 3 is the Professor, Department of Clinical Psychology, Faculty of Behavioral Sciences, Chairperson Internal Complaints Committee and Advisor to SGT University, Gurugram, Delhi, India. He has served her faculty to the eminence of which is one of the premium mental health training institutes in Delhi, approved by Rehabilitation Council in India. She also has supervised students ranging from undergraduate to graduate programs, including students from UK, Iran, and Pakistan. Besides academic supervision, she has been credited to 80 research papers, including 25 book chapters published in a reputable index journal books, and known as the presenter in a variety of international and national conferences. Now she is